All right, film fans, let's get ready to dive deep into JoJo Rabbit, a movie that's been requested quite a bit. And, it's one that's generated a lot of discussion, a lot of different takes. And this is not going to be just like your typical review. We're going to do a deep dive using some pretty interesting YouTube perspectives to help you come to your own conclusions about JoJo Rabbit. So just a super quick recap. You're looking at a 2019 dark comedy set in Nazi Germany, directed by Taika Waititi, who you might know from Thor Ragnarok. And our main character is JoJo Betzler, a 10-year-old who is a member of the Hitler Youth and has a rather unusual imaginary friend, Adolf Hitler.
Yeah, so to help us navigate this pretty wild world of satire and symbolism, we have our film expert back, someone who can spot a hidden meaning a mile away. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I'm pretty fascinated by this movie too. I mean, a child Nazi protagonist with an imaginary Hitler. Is it brilliant or is it just a complete disaster? I mean, there's been a lot of talk about this film, with some people praising its boldness and others being pretty offended by the whole concept.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, right away you had YouTubers like Jeremy Jans and The Critical Drinker, and they were skeptical, can you really pull off humor in a story set in Nazi Germany? It seems like such a delicate tightrope walk. But before we get to the humor, I'm just the premise itself. A kid brainwashed by Nazi ideology with Hitler as his close confidant. You got to admit, it grabs your attention.
It's definitely jarring, but I think that's the point, you
Yeah.
know? This movie isn't shying away from the reality of indoctrination at all. I mean, think about that scene in the classroom where they're feeding those kids these just grotesque stereotypes about Jewish people, literally teaching them to see them as monsters. And then later, when JoJo's caught up in that mob mentality at the book burning, it's scary, It shows how easily hate can take root, especially in young minds that haven't developed those critical thinking skills yet.
Yeah, it's really hard to watch JoJo parroting that stuff, even knowing it's all he's ever been exposed to. But it brings up that big question. Can you actually use humor to deal with something as dark as the Nazi regime? The Foundation for Economic Education argues that satire is necessary, essential for challenging these harmful ideologies.
Yeah.
But does JoJo Rabbit actually pull it off?
That's the million-dollar question. And yeah, it's one that's caused a lot of debate for sure. I mean, the film's satire is sharp, but it is walking a fine line. Some critics, like Jordan Rumi from World of Reels, they were understandably concerned about some of the Jewish jokes in the film, worried they could be misconstrued or even cause harm.
Yeah, and I mean, satire is supposed to expose and ridicule the absurdity of hateful ideologies, not endorse them. It's almost like holding up a funhouse mirror to these hateful beliefs and distorting them to reveal their ugliness. But you have films like American History X, which, while trying to expose neo-Nazi brutality, it might have inadvertently glorified it for some viewers. So how does JoJo Rabbit avoid falling into that trap?
Well, I think one key difference is in how it portrays the Nazis themselves. They're often shown as incompetent, bumbling, even pathetic sometimes. Take Captain Klenzendorf. He's a high-ranking officer who's totally disillusioned with the war. He just drowns his sorrows in schnapps. And in the end, he sacrifices himself to save JoJo, which is so far from the typical image of a cold-hearted Nazi villain.
Yeah, instead of being afraid, it's almost like, wait, these guys are clowns.
Yeah.
It's like a way of deconstructing this myth of Nazi power, exposing how absurd their whole ideology is. But even with the comedy, JoJo Rabbit has these moments of real depth and emotion. The way it shows the human side of people caught up in the Nazi regime is really interesting, especially with JoJo as he starts to question everything he's been taught.
Right, JoJo's internal struggle is at the heart of the film. Imagine the conflict he must feel. Seeing his mother's resistance activities, witnessing her compassion for Elsa, this young Jewish girl hiding in their attic, and then you have his own growing affection for Elsa, which goes against everything he's ever been told about Jewish people. He's trapped in this web of conflicting emotions. It's like this psychological phenomenon called cognitive dissonance, where his beliefs clash with his actual experiences.
Yeah, what a coming-of-age story, right? All happening amidst this backdrop of unimaginable horror. We're watching JoJo, this boy raised to hate, slowly dismantle that hate as he forms this bond with Elsa.
It's beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time. I mean, you remember that scene where Elsa directly challenges JoJo's beliefs? Or when he starts forging those letters from her fiancé? It's like he's clinging to this world he thought he knew, even as it's crumbling all around him.
And that sense of encroaching doom is reflected in how the film looks too right. That once vibrant town becomes more and more desolate. Filled with exhausted soldiers and military barricades, you could really feel the life being drained out of JoJo's world.
Absolutely. The film uses visuals to mirror JoJo's emotional state, and that brings us to this devastating turning point in the story, Rosie's death. That image of her vibrant dancing shoes hanging lifelessly. next to JoJo. It's just seared into my memory. It's such a powerful reminder of the innocent lives lost because of hate and intolerance.
It's a punch to the gut, for sure. And it shows the film's ability to balance humor with real tragedy. We laugh with JoJo, we feel for him, and then bam, we're hit with this stark reality. It's an emotional roller coaster.
It really is, and that's what makes it so effective. It's not just a feel-good story. It's messy, it's challenging, it makes you think. And that complexity extends to Elsa's portrayal, too. She's not just a victim. She's strong, resourceful, and uses her wit to survive this terrifying situation.
Totally. She's always challenging JoJo's preconceived notions, forcing him to confront how absurd his prejudices are. And their relationship really highlights the film's main message, tolerance and empathy. It's about seeing the shared humanity in everyone, even those we've been conditioned to see as the other.
It's about finding common ground amidst the most divisive circumstances, and that resonates so strongly today in a world that often feels more and more polarized.
For sure, JoJo Rabbit reminds us of the power of connection, of looking beyond labels and ideologies to see the individual, which makes it even more interesting that the film got such a range of reactions. People seem to either love it or hate it. Not much middle ground.
Yeah, and those different reactions are definitely worth exploring. Some critics, like those from the AV Club, they found the anti-hate message a bit predictable, arguing it didn't really add anything new to the conversation. But others, like Peter Howell from the Toronto Star, they were blown away by the film's meaningful lunacy and whimsical brilliance. They praised its fresh take on a sensitive subject.
So is it a stroke of satirical genius that dismantles hateful ideologies? Or is it just a misguided attempt at humor that trivializes the horrors of the past? That's for you to decide. But one thing's for sure, JoJo Rabbit is a film that sticks with you. It gets under your skin and makes you think.
Absolutely. It sparks conversations and forces us to confront uncomfortable truths. And that's so valuable, especially in a world where those difficult conversations are often avoided.
It really makes you wonder if JoJo Rabbit were released today. In our current climate, would it even be made? Would it face a ton of backlash? Would studios be too scared to take that risk?
It's a really interesting question. And it leads to the heart of what we're doing here. We want you to think for yourself. Don't just take our word for it. Don't just rely on reviews or what you see online. Go experience JoJo Rabbit for yourself and form your own opinion.
It's exactly. Engage in those difficult conversations. Debate the film's merits. Challenge its flaws. That's how we learn. That's how we grow. And who knows, maybe JoJo Rabbit will spark something in you. A new perspective, a deeper understanding, a new appreciation for the power of satire. To confront hate, even in its most ridiculous forms.
Yeah, don't let all the noise drown out your own voice. Dive in, explore, and discover what makes JoJo Rabbit such a unique and thought-provoking film.
And speaking of diving in, let's take a closer look at the film's visual language. There's so much symbolism packed into every scene. It's like a treasure hunt for deeper meaning.
Yeah, you said it. One of the most striking motifs is the knife. JoJo gets it at that Hitler youth camp, where killing Jews is still just a game to him. It's a toy, a symbol of power, until he's confronted with the reality of Elsa.
Well, that reminds me of my little Thought Trees video on YouTube. They do this incredible breakdown of all the motifs and metaphors in the film. They pointed out how the knife starts as this plaything for JoJo, but then transforms into this symbol of the violence he's being groomed to embrace. It's like this reminder that hate, even in the hands of a child, can have terrifying consequences.
So true. And that shift is also reflected in how Elsa uses the knife.
Right.
She turns the tables on JoJo, using his own weapon against him. It's a chilling moment because it highlights the fear and distrust that exists in their relationship at first. And then later we see the knife again, when Captain Klenzendorf gives it back to JoJo, urging him to use it to protect his family.
But that whole idea of protection takes on this twisted meaning. When JoJo, in a moment of grief and rage after Rosie's death, tries to stab Elsa with it, it's like that scene just perfectly captures the conflict inside him. He's been taught to hate, to see Elsa as the enemy. But his heart is pulling him in a completely different direction. The knife becomes this symbol of his internal struggle, his battle to reconcile these two opposing forces.
And in the end, he just throws the knife away. He lets go of that destructive impulse. It's a powerful visual representation of his internal shift, his rejection of the violence that Nazi ideology promotes.
And then there's the symbolism of shoes, particularly Rosie's shoes, those bright dancing shoes that represent her spirit, her love of life. I remember Make Better Media on YouTube pointed out how those shoes are introduced so subtly throughout the film. We see them dancing in a reflection. We see them as Rosie walks through town. We see JoJo helping her tie them.
And we see them hanging there lifeless, right next to JoJo after Rosie's execution. It's such a powerful contrast. Those shoes, which once symbolized his mother's vibrancy and defiance, now represent the cruelty and injustice of the Nazi regime.
Ugh, it's such a gut punch.
Yeah.
But it's also brilliant visual storytelling. And then at the very end, we see Elsa wearing Rosie's shoes as she dances in freedom. It's like a passing of the torch, a symbol of hope and resilience.
Exactly. Rosie's spirit, her love for life, her resistance, it all lives on through Elsa.
And of course, we can't forget about the rabbit itself, JoJo's namesake, and this image that keeps popping up throughout the film. The Critical Drinker had an interesting take on this. He pointed out how JoJo initially sees the rabbit as a sign of weakness, something to be mocked. He's embarrassed by the nickname JoJo Rabbit because it undermines this image he wants to project, this tough, ruthless Nazi.
But I think the rabbit represents something much deeper, too. It symbolizes JoJo's own sensitivity, his innate compassion, which the Nazi ideology is trying so hard to suppress. Remember that scene at the Hitler youth camp where he's told to kill a rabbit? He just can't bring himself to do it. And that moment of hesitation reveals his true nature.
Yeah, it's like the rabbit is a mirror reflecting his inner conflict. And it's imaginary Hitler who, in this really twisted way, encourages JoJo to embrace the rabbit, to see its strengths. Of course, Hitler's interpretation is all about cunning and survival. But for JoJo, it becomes about recognizing the power of empathy and kindness.
And in the end, JoJo does embrace the rabbit, both literally and figuratively. He gets rid of the Nazi uniform, he embraces his connection with Elsa, and he chooses compassion over hate. It's a transformation that's underscored by these carefully crafted symbols.
Absolutely. JoJo Rabbit isn't just a comedy. It uses humor to explore these really complex themes: indoctrination, prejudice, and the power of human connection. And it does it all with this visual richness that makes you want to watch it over and over again. Every detail, from the costumes to the sets to these recurring motifs, adds another layer of meaning to the story.
It's like peeling back the layers of an onion. You discover more complexity with each viewing. Speaking of layers, let's talk about the film's message. It's obviously anti-hate, but it's also been praised for its nuanced take on redemption and forgiveness.
Yeah, it's not about saying the Nazis were okay, but it does make you wonder if people caught up in a hateful ideology can actually find their way back to humanity.
Exactly, and Captain Klenzendorf is a perfect example. He's a flawed character for sure, a drunkard, a participant in this horrific regime, but he also shows compassion and ultimately gives his life to save JoJo. It's a portrayal that goes beyond simple good versus evil.
And even JoJo himself, a child indoctrinated into hate, is given a chance to redeem himself. He chooses empathy over prejudice. He forms a real bond with Elsa despite everything he's been taught.
And that's what makes JoJo Rabbit so powerful. It gives you a glimmer of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest times, humanity can prevail. It's a message that's so important, especially today. And it's that complexity, that refusal to give easy answers. You know what I mean? It's what makes JoJo Rabbit so powerful and also so divisive. It doesn't shy away from the ugliness, but it still finds these moments of hope.
Yeah, it's a tightrope walk, for sure. And not everyone agrees with Taika Waititi's approach. I was watching WatchMojo's video about the top 10 reasons JoJo Rabbit is so controversial, and it highlighted some interesting points. Like, some people feel that satirizing this topic is just irresponsible.
Yeah.
That it downplays the horrors of what happened.
Yeah, that's a valid concern. Humor can be tricky like that. But like the Foundation for Economic Education argues satire can be a really effective tool for dismantling these dangerous ideologies. By making the Nazis look ridiculous, by exposing the absurdity of their beliefs, JoJo Rabbit kind of takes away their power and makes them less appealing, especially to young people who are vulnerable to that kind of propaganda.
Yeah, it's like you're poking holes in their facade.
Yeah.
And suddenly these scary figures are deflated. They're exposed as the buffoons they really are. And that's where the whole imaginary Hitler thing comes in. Such a bold choice, and it sparks so much debate.
Rightfully so. It's risky, but I think it works. Because Taika Waititi never lets you forget how ridiculous Hitler really was. He's presented as this caricature, this childish fantasy, like a reflection of JoJo's warped worldview.
And as JoJo starts to question things, imaginary Hitler gets more and more unhinged. Like he's desperately clinging to power as everything falls apart. It's a really cool way to show JoJo's internal struggle visually, his rejection of Nazi ideology.
It's brilliant. And I think it's also important to remember that Taika Waititi himself is of Jewish and Maori descent. So this isn't just an outsider's perspective. It's someone grappling with a painful history and using humor to confront and dismantle hate from within.
Yeah, it adds a whole other layer to the film.
Yeah.
It's such a bold and subversive approach, and it's resonated with a lot of people. But like WatchMojo pointed out, some critics felt the film wasn't shocking enough. that it kind of held back when it came to satirizing Nazi Germany?
It's a tough balance to strike. You want to be provocative but not offensive. But I think the film's strength is in its subtlety, the way it combines humor with genuine emotion and heartbreak. It's not just slapstick. It's this nuanced exploration of a dark period in history, seen through the eyes of a child.
And that child's perspective is so important. JoJo's journey,
No.
his disillusionment, his growing understanding of the world, the devastating consequences of hate. That's what makes the film so compelling. We see everything through his eyes. We experience his confusion, his fear, and ultimately his awakening.
And it's that awakening that carries the film's message of hope. JoJo chooses empathy over prejudice, love over hate. And he finds redemption, even though he was raised in this culture of intolerance.
Such a powerful message, especially today. I mean, look at the world right now. It feels like we're constantly dealing with this increasing polarization and division. JoJo Rabbit reminds us how important it is to think critically, to question the things we're told, and to recognize the humanity in everyone, even those we see as the enemy.
Absolutely. It's a call for empathy, for understanding, for bridging those divides that separate us. And it does it with this incredible mix of humor, heart, and visual richness. It's a truly unforgettable film.
We've talked a lot about the symbolism in the film
Yeah.
and how it adds those extra layers of meaning. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the technical aspects, the cinematography, the editing, the score. How do they contribute to the film's impact?
Yeah, that's a great question. The technical side of JoJo Rabbit is just as masterful as the themes, like the cinematography. It's beautiful, but it's also very deliberate. Did you notice how vibrant and colorful JoJo's world is at the beginning? Those bright yellows and blues really stand out, almost like a children's book.
Yeah. But as the war gets closer and JoJo starts to see the cracks in the Nazi facade, the colors become more muted, more realistic. You can really feel the shift.
Exactly. It's a really clever way to mirror JoJo's emotional journey. And the editing is brilliant, too. Taika Waititi uses these quick cuts and jump cuts to create this almost frantic energy at times, reflecting the chaos and absurdity of JoJo's world.
And then you have those slow motion moments, especially during the violent scenes or the emotional ones.
Yeah.
It really draws you into JoJo's experience. You feel the weight of those moments.
For sure. And we can't forget the music. It's whimsical and haunting at the same time. There are these playful, almost childlike melodies that highlight the absurdity of JoJo's imaginary world. But then it shifts to these darker, more somber tones as the reality of war sets in.
Yeah, it's like the music is a character in itself,
Yeah.
reflecting the emotional arc of the film.
Exactly. The technical aspects aren't just there for show, they're integral to the storytelling. They work together with the themes and the performances to create this really immersive and unforgettable experience.
Yeah, it really is amazing how all those technical elements come together to make such a powerful and nuanced film. We've been talking about JoJo Rabbit for a while now, and honestly, I feel like we've just scratched the surface.
I know, right? It's the kind of film that stays with you. Like, you could talk about it for hours and still find new things to discover.
So to wrap things up, let's go back to what makes this film so interesting. Its ability to tackle these really heavy topics: indoctrination, prejudice, the horrors of war. And it does it with this blend of humor and heart. It's a delicate balance. And as we've discussed, not everyone agrees with Taika Waititi's approach.
Right. Some people find the humor jarring, even offensive, given the subject matter. But honestly, I think that discomfort is part of what makes the film so powerful. It forces us to think about our own preconceived notions, about how we deal with history, how we process trauma, and how we ultimately choose to fight against hate.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's not a film that gives you easy answers or makes you feel all warm and fuzzy. It challenges you to think critically, to question the stories you've been told, and to find your own way of understanding the world.
And that's a responsibility we all have, right? To engage with difficult subjects, to challenge our own biases, and to work towards a more just and compassionate world. I think JoJo Rabbit is a powerful reminder that even in the darkest times, humor and hope can be weapons against hate and intolerance.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So if you haven't seen JoJo Rabbit yet, I highly recommend checking it out. But be prepared. It's a wild ride. It's funny. It's heartbreaking. It's thought-provoking. And it just might change how you see things.
And for those who have seen it, I encourage you to watch it again. Pay attention to the small details, the visual cues, those moments of brilliance that you might have missed the first time around.
And as always, we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on JoJo Rabbit? Do you think it was funny, offensive, brilliant, confusing? Head over to our website or social media and let us know. We love hearing your perspectives and getting deeper into these conversations with you.
Because at the end of the day, the deep dive is about empowering you, the listener. to explore, to question, to discover, to find your own voice. We believe that the more informed and engaged we are as individuals, the better equipped we'll be to handle the complexities of the world and create a more compassionate and understanding future.
Couldn't agree more. Until next time, keep diving deep, keep exploring, and keep those conversations going.